Before we get to the story, I'd like to say thanks so much for visiting my new channel. I'm going to be uploading cosmic horror related stories every single day. So if that sounds good, please drop a like and don't forget to subscribe. It means a lot, especially when just getting started. I hope you enjoy the story. 20 years on commercial fishing boats teaches you a specific kind of patience that most people never develop. You learn to wait out weather, wait out seasons, wait out the long stretches between good hauls when the boat is running and the fuel is burning and the nets are coming up light. You learn that the ocean gives what it wants to give and not what you want it to give, and that the space between those two things is where the work actually lives. You also learn what belongs down there and what doesn't. That's the part nobody talks about much, but it's real. After enough years, you develop a sense of the water, what it holds, what it's likely to put in your net on a given day at a given depth. You stop being surprised by things. The ocean is big and strange, but it's consistently big and strange. And there's a difference between something unusual and something wrong. What came up in the net on a Thursday morning, about 60 miles off the shelf, was wrong. Not unusual, wrong. My name is Callum, and I've run the same trawler, the Order, for 11 years, working deep water commercial drag out of a port in coastal Washington. My crew runs 4 when we're fully staffed. On that particular run, we had 3, myself and 2 others. A deckhand named Soren, who'd been with me for 2 seasons, young and capable, and not yet worn down by the work, and my engineer Niels, who was older than me and quieter, and who kept the Order running through conditions that should have retired us both. The run had been average, nothing exceptional in the haul, nothing exceptional in the weather, the kind of trip where you do the work and the work produces a reasonable outcome and you go home. We were 2 days out on a planned 5-day run, and I'd set the drag at a depth I didn't usually work, deeper than our standard range, because a contact had mentioned good returns in that column, and I had a route that took me within range of it. The net went down in the morning, and we ran it for the standard drag duration, and when we started hauling it back, the winch labor was wrong. I know the sound and feel of a full net. I know the difference between a heavy haul and a net that's got something in it that's resisting the pull, whether that's a tangle or a large individual fish or debris. The Order's winch has a specific character when it's working against something substantial, a laboring quality, a rhythm that changes. This was different from all of those. The net was heavy, but the weight wasn't distributed the way catch weight distributes. It was centered, concentrated in one area of the net toward the deep end, pulling back against the winch with a consistency that felt less like mass and more like something pushing downward deliberately. I didn't say anything about it to Soren and Niels while we hauled. I watched the winch and I felt the cable and I waited to see what came up. The net broke the surface and I saw it through the water before we'd gotten it fully clear. A shape in the lower section, large, not moving the way fish move, not rolling with the net's motion, holding itself still, oriented. We got the net over the deck and opened it, and the catch came down and the creature came with it and settled onto the deck and stayed there and looked at nothing or everything. In a way I couldn't immediately categorize. I want to describe it carefully because I've had 2 years now to think about how to do that, and I still find it difficult. Not because it was horrifying to look at, not in a visceral way, More because the longer you looked, the more your eyes wanted to find a familiar framework and kept failing to. It was roughly the size of a large sea lion, maybe a bit longer. But the comparison stops there because the body plan was entirely different from anything in that category. Multiple limbs, more than 4, arranged without the bilateral symmetry that virtually everything with limbs has. The limbs themselves were jointed in too many places, not broken looking, just capable of configurations that arms and legs don't make. The skin was dark and shifted in a way I initially thought was bioluminescence, but wasn't quite that. More like the surface was processing light differently in different areas, some parts absorbing more, some less, in a slow and non-repeating cycle. It had a head in the sense that one end of it was differentiated from the other. I won't describe the face in detail. I'll say it had features that served the functions you'd expect features to serve, sensing the environment, taking in information, and leave it at that. It was calm. That was the first wrong thing beyond its appearance. Nothing that comes up from depth is calm. The pressure differential alone should have been catastrophic, and beyond that, being pulled from the water into open air is a violent experience for anything that lives underwater. It should have been dying. It should have been thrashing. It was still, settled on the deck, like something that had been on decks before. I got on the radio to a marine biology contact I'd used before, a researcher at a coastal university who'd helped me identify unusual catch on previous runs. I described what was on my deck as accurately as I could. There was a long pause on the other end, and then she asked me to describe it again from the beginning. I did. Another pause. She told me it didn't match anything in her field, which covered deep Pacific species comprehensively. She said the physical description I was giving her wasn't consistent with any known taxonomy, and that I should photograph it extensively. And if it died, I should preserve it in the coldest conditions I had available and bring it back intact. I told her it wasn't dead. Another pause. She told me that wasn't possible given the depth we'd pulled it from. I looked at the creature on my deck, which was breathing, if the movement of its skin surface constituted breathing, and told her I understood that, and that it was happening anyway. She told me to keep it contained and call her back in an hour. Soren had been watching it from the moment it hit the deck, not warily, not with any visible fear, just watching it the way you watch something that has your full attention. He was crouched about 6 feet from it, close enough that I told him to give it more room, and he moved back without looking away from it. I went below briefly to get my phone for the photographs, and when I came back up, Soren had closed the distance again. He was about 3 feet from it, and the creature had one of its limbs extended slightly in his direction, not reaching, just oriented toward him, the way a plant grows toward light. I called his name, and he looked at me, and his expression was normal, clear, no distress. He stood up and stepped back and said sorry, and I let it go. I took photographs. The creature held still for them, which sounds like a small thing and isn't. While I was photographing, I noticed something I hadn't registered in the first minutes. The creature was oriented in a consistent direction. Its head end was pointed the same way, regardless of the deck's movement. The small rolls and pitches of the boat on the water, like a compass needle maintaining north through a turn. I walked around it and crouched down and looked at where it was pointed. Northeast, roughly. Consistent. I didn't know what that meant. I still don't, fully. But it was the kind of detail that settles in the back of your mind and sits there. Niels had been watching from the wheelhouse doorway since we'd opened the net. He came out on deck after about an hour and stood near me and looked at the creature for a while and then said, quietly, that he thought we should put it back. I didn't disagree. The question was whether putting it back was as simple as it sounded, whether it would survive the return, whether it even wanted to go back, which was a strange thing to be considering about a fish, except that nothing about this was a fish. I told Niels to give me another hour. I wanted to understand what I had before I made any decision about it. Soren came to find me at the stern about 20 minutes after that. He'd been on the deck with the creature the whole time, never far from it. He sat down on the rail beside me and looked out at the water and then said he thought it had been down there for a long time. I asked him how he meant. He thought about it and said he didn't know exactly how he meant it, just that when he looked at it, he got the impression of duration, of something that had been waiting without urgency, because it had no reason to be urgent, like it had all the time it needed. I asked him if it had done anything, made any sound, made any movement toward him. He said no. He said he just got that feeling from looking at it. I went back to the deck. The creature had moved while I'd been at the stern. Not away from its position. It was still in roughly the same place, but it had gathered things from the deck around it. Small things, a short length of frayed rope, a couple of flat pieces of debris that had come up in the net with the catch, a coil of monofilament. It had arranged them on the deck in front of itself. I stood there and looked at what it had made. I want to be precise about what I saw. The arrangement of items on the deck was not random. The rope formed a curve. The flat debris pieces were set at angles of that curve. The monofilament ran from one piece to another in lines that spread outward from the curve at regular intervals. It was the net, the drag configuration we'd been running, the spread of the net below the surface, the way the lines ran from the mouth of it down to the weighted edge. Not an exact replica. No creature working with deck scraps is going to produce an exact replica of a net configuration. But the structure of it was there in the arrangement, recognizable in the way a rough sketch is recognizable as its subject. It had shown me the net from below, the specific set of our net at the specific depth we'd been dragging, from the perspective of something that had been beneath it looking up. It had seen the net coming. It had been in the net on purpose. I stood on that deck for a long time looking at what it had made and working through what that meant. Soren came and stood beside me and looked at it too and didn't say anything for a while. Then he said, "I think it's been waiting for something like us." I asked him what he meant by something like us. He said he didn't mean us specifically, our boat, our crew. He meant the kind of thing we were, something that drags the deep water and pulls things up. He said he thought it had been down there waiting for something that would do exactly what we'd done, that would bring it up. I asked him how he knew that. He said he didn't know it. He just thought it. I stood there and thought about the orientation, the consistent northeast heading it had maintained since it came on deck, the compass needle quality of it, pointing at something I couldn't see from where I was standing. I thought about the depth we'd pulled it from, deeper than my usual range, a route I'd taken because of a contact's recommendation, the specific chain of small decisions that had put our net in that exact column of water on that exact morning. I didn't follow that thought all the way to its end. I made a decision instead. We put it back. Niels rigged a canvas sling and we worked it under the creature, which allowed this without resistance, every limb cooperating with the handling as though it understood what we were doing. The three of us carried it to the rail and lowered it over the side on the sling, and when the water touched it, the skin shifted, that light processing quality going active across its whole surface, and then it released the sling and went down. No splash, no disturbance. It went into the water the way something enters a familiar place, smoothly and without drama, and then it was gone. The water closed over the spot, and the surface was flat, and the order sat in the quiet, and the three of us stood at the rail looking at where it had been. Niels said we should head in. I told him we had 3 days left on the run. He said he understood that and repeated that we should head in. I thought about it and then said we'd finish the run, that we were 3 days from port and the hold wasn't full, and I wasn't burning fuel and time on a feeling. He nodded and went back to the engine room and didn't bring it up again. Soren was quiet for the rest of that day, not troubled, not shaken in any way I could point to, just interior, like he was listening to something at a frequency I couldn't hear. I didn't call my marine biology contact back. I thought about it and couldn't figure out what I would say that would be useful to either of us. I had photographs of something she couldn't identify that had survived a pressure differential that should have killed it, had arranged deck debris into a recognizable configuration of our specific net set, and had gone back into the water voluntarily. What she would do with that information was beyond my ability to predict, and I wasn't sure the answer was anything good. The last 3 days of the run were normal. Good hauls, decent weather, nothing in the nets that didn't belong. Soren came back to himself gradually, was talking normally by the second day, never mentioned the creature or the way he'd been around it. I didn't ask. I thought about the arrangement on the deck more than I'd like to admit. The net set from below, the way it had shown me a perspective that required it to have been there, watching our gear come down through the water, making the decision to stay in the path of it, planning it. I thought about what Soren had said about waiting, not for us specifically, for something like us, something that drags the deep water. We've been doing that for a long time, as an industry, I mean, long enough that whatever was down there at that depth would have had a lot of chances to do what it did if it had been waiting long enough. A lot of boats, a lot of nets, a lot of hauls, and it had been in that spot specifically, at that depth, on that morning. Either it had chosen us or something about us had made us the first option that worked. I didn't know which of those was more unsettling, and I still don't. We came back into port on a Sunday evening, and I unloaded the catch and filed the trip log, and didn't put anything in it about what we'd hauled on Thursday morning. I told myself that was a practical decision, that I had no framework to report it in, and no desire to spend my time dealing with the questions it would generate. That was true. It was also true that I didn't write it down, because writing it down would have meant committing to what I thought had happened, and I wasn't ready to do that. I gave the crew 4 days off and took 4 days off myself and tried to think about other things. I went back out on the following Thursday. Same crew, same boat, same general working area. I set the drag at my standard depth, back in the normal range, the depth I'd been using for years before that run. Comfortable, known. We ran the drag and hauled it back, and the net came up normal weight, normal distribution, good catch, nothing in it that didn't belong. I let out the breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. The second drag of the day I set at the same depth, hauled it back the same way, normal. We moved to a new position in the afternoon, about 12 miles from the morning's work. Different coordinates entirely, different bottom topography. I set the drag. We ran it. I started the haul. The winch labored the same way it had the first time. That same centered, deliberate resistance. That quality of weight that wasn't distributed like catch weight. I stood at the winch and felt it through my hands and looked at Soren across the deck, and he looked back at me, and neither of us said anything. The net broke the surface. Something was in the deep end of it, large, held still despite the haul, oriented with that same compass needle consistency even before it cleared the water. I looked at it through the surface for a moment. Different location, 60 miles and 3 days and a different drag depth, and it was in my net again. I thought about what Soren had said, not for us specifically, for something like us. The net cleared the water, and I stood there with my hand on the winch control and made a decision about whether to open it. I opened it.